I would love for you to give us a little bit of distinction between what's the difference between us showing up with kind of a more of a productive, emotional, intense energy versus more of a destructive, out of control energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, one easy way to see it is if you look back at different situations you were in where things got emotionally intense and you took an action or made a decision or you spoke something. And you just look at that situation and you ask yourself, which part of me was in control in that moment? What part of me was doing the speaking? What part of me took that action? And you might realize like, oh, that was the angry part that said those words. That wasn't actually my deepest true part. You know, because 10 minutes later, I was feeling okay again. So
right.
What would the okay part have said if I was able to access that okay part, you know, in the difficult situation? So that's one way to think of it is when you want to, and if you're in the moment and you want to say something to somebody, what part of me wants to say this? And you might very quickly be able to see, oh, that's the angry part.
That's a great distinction, David. I'm already thinking of an example when I was on a part of a large committee and I made a statement because I could see where we were about to make a vote on something that was very contentious. And I was trying to recommend we should not vote right now. We should wait. And I was feeling very frustrated. And the angry part came out. It was not productive. I didn't get my voice heard in that moment. So I can see had I stepped back and said, what voice do I want to bring to this? It might have been very, very different. Well, David, before we end our time, I know we're starting to get close. I want to talk a little about improv. You mentioned that early on as even another way we can bring in some tools to help us with this. How can improv also help us show up the way we want to, access those higher states, be the person in the moment that it's going to be the most productive for everyone in the room?
Well, improv, one of the reasons I love it is because it trains us to be really present in an energetic way. You know, because there's presence in terms of like a meditation, which I highly recommend, you know. But in the moment now is where we get everything done. You know, we can only take an action in the now. We can only solve a problem now. You know, we can only experience joy now. You know, a lot of us have this idea that like, oh, later, once I get this thing, I will experience joy. But if you actually get there and do experience joy, it's going to be happening in the now. So improv trains us to be more fully with our full energy in the only place that everything is happening and the only place where we can make all of our impact. And that's the now. So that, and also the one reason I love it is because it's like basically emotional practice. You get to practice expressing in all different emotions for how you're feeling in the scene, in the moment, and it's fun and it's safe. Teams that do improv together immediately have more richer and deeper conversations because just the act of expressing in front of another person and laughing with another person without any stakes involved because it's an improv scene, just that makes you feel safer around someone else because you're like, oh, emotions are okay. Whatever I do, it's okay in this moment, you know. And so now you're able to go to a new layer of trust. And there are principles of improv that enhance relationships and create more collaboration on every single team. Like the number one principle of improv is yes and. I mean, we could spend and most people have heard that, but we could literally spend an entire podcast or more talking just about yes and the power of positive validation and support for the person in front of you. You know, if you're in an improv scene on stage and someone says something to you and you don't act like that's the truth and you don't roll with that idea, it's a terrible scene. No one likes to watch that. It gets really awkward really fast. It's not funny. You lose the energy. No one likes it. Well, that's the same kind of thing that happens in most business meetings with most leaders because there's not kind of a yes and approach to it. And it's easily applicable in business situations. You can do whole brainstormings. I've run brainstormings strictly on a yes and approach, and people love it because it changes the whole way that people communicate and relate to each other. So improv is improv is the most fun and energetic way for me to practice being in the present moment with our emotions, with whatever's arising in me, whatever's arising in another person, in a way that we perform at a really high level, no matter what is arising. And that's the skill that people need these days. That's the skill leaders need these days, because the world is changing so fast. What better skill is there than how can I be in this moment and show up at my best capability?
What I love about that is two things that I think improv really helps to connect what you've been talking about. First, because you're on stage performing, you have to be thinking about the other person. You have to be thinking about what they're going to give you. You have to be fully present and be ready for that. It's like they're going to throw you a ball, right? You got to be ready to catch it, okay? So you can't be thinking about yourself. So it kind of forces you not to get into some of those scripts or some of those conditioning patterns. I think that's one. The second thing I like about it is it reminds us that it's not about us, right? It's about the performance, or it's about that conversation, or it's about what you're building together. I was doing work with a client up in Chicago, and they brought in Second City. And so I got to see them do a little bit of work. And one of the things members of the Second City, so this is, for those that don't know, kind of a famous improv theater group. And one of the things they said, one of the things we practice with each other is we say, bring a brick, don't bring a cathedral. And the idea is, if you bring something already fully formed, there's no place for the other person to take that. I mean, it's, okay, well, that's nice. Thanks for sharing your cathedral. There's nothing I can really do with that. But if you bring a brick, then that invites them to bring a brick. And then you bring a brick, and you can build something together. And I've even seen that happen in business cases where, the design department brings a fully formed design to the engineering group. The engineering group feels like they have no say in it. And they're like, well, I guess you didn't need us. And it immediately shuts down the collaboration. So I think it's also about, how we do that together. So I love that it just helps us to make that pivot and make it about others and not just about us.